Right, this is the context on 3 different practitioners by us.
So, Fences was written in 1985 by an American practitioner called August Wilson. The play is naturalistic, so it's theatre that tries to make the illusion of reality. So things like the grass would actually be real grass, and a tree would be like a real tree. It was set in the 1950s, and it was first developed at the Eugene O'Neill Theatre Centre in 1983.
August Wilson, he was an influential 20th century playwright, and he was the most prominent African American of that craft. He was raised by his mother after his father left him with his 5 siblings, and in the play, Troy and Rose's relationship kind of mimics this because Troy wasn't there for Rose. He lived in Minnesota and in Seattle. The characters and plots were based on characters he experienced growing up. He was noted especially for his decade cycle and the Pittsburgh cycle, which consisted of one play set in each of the decades of the 20th century.
The context of the play is on Wilson's life living in Hazelwood, where his family was a target of racial threats. For example, in school he decided to leave at the age of 15 after being accused of plagiarism on a paper because the teacher thought that a black person can write as well as that. In Fences, the character of Troy helps pave the way for other black people to have opportunities under conditions they were never free to experience. The play is set during the season that Hank Aaron led the Milwaukee Braves to the World Series, beating the New York Giants. When Fences take place, blacks like Aaron prove that they can not only compete with white ball players, but that they could be leaders of a professional league. And Wilson draws a link between the release of the slaves and the disproportionate number of black men in jails and in low-income occupations.
So The Caretaker by Harold Printer was first published in 1960 by one of the most influential modern British dramatists, Harold Printer. The play is an example of theatre of the absurd. It refers to the view that life is meaningless and useless, that you come into the world with nothing and end with death, which is a state of nothingness. The plots in these plays are anti-realistic, going against many of the accepted norms of conventional theatre, are often characterised by a deliberate absence of the cause and effect on relationship between scenes, and have a non-linear plot development, sometimes clinical and occasionally appear as there is no plot at all. Absurd characters are usually unsure about who and where they are, and often an absence of character development.
So Harold Pinter was a son of a Jewish dressmaker. He was born in Hackney, which is in East London. Pinter was met with prejudice against being a Jew, which indicated his importance to become a dramatist. He has won recognition as a fighter for human rights. Pinter wrote the play while he was living with his wife in a flat, and the characters in his play are Mick, Davies and Aston. Mick is like the man who was renting out one of the flats that they owned, and his brother Aston was also a character in his life, and his brother Aston brought home a homeless guy called Davies, and because it actually happened, he decided to put it into a play.
So this is the context of The Caretaker. In the early 1950s, Britain had just won World War II and the Korean War had just begun. The rationing that was supposed to stop once the war ended had carried on. Lots of Britain's money had gone to Germany, and the British Empire took over the Commonwealth, and India broke free from British control. So the British Empire was crumbling. At the time the play was written, the anti-Vietnam War movement, the women's movement, the gay rights movement and the environmental movement, there was all protests to do with them. In the UK in the 1960s, economic growth translated into rising living standards. So households had more disposable income, so could afford things like cars. Compared to current prices, housing was also still cheap.
Mother Courage by Bertolt Brecht. Written in 1939 by the German playwright and poet, the action of the play takes place from 1624 to 1636, represented in 12 scenes. This play is an example of epic theatre where the playwright wants to remind the audience that they are watching theatre, not real life, by using the arranging devices such as the V effect, which is effective at alienating the audience. Most of the epic theatre has a political, social and moral message and aims to avoid emotional investment into the characters from the audience. Epic theatre breaks the fourth wall. This is the imaginary wall between the actors and the audience that keeps them as observers. They are active members of the theatrical experience and keep thinking throughout.